One. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Generalist, the show that tries to teach you a little something about everything. I'm your host, Fuile Gabuza, and today we're going to be talking about something that should matter to you because it matters to other people, and they've started to raise the alarm about it. I know it certainly matters to me because it's something that it's a hobby, if you will, that I find very dear to me. I'm an avid reader and I'm an aspiring author as well. So it's something that I think that should matter to people because reading is an important thing. And I've given away the topic. Wow, interesting. But anyway, let's get into it. I was actually going to talk about something very different. And in the spirit of remaining cryptic, so you come back next week, I'm going to leave it there. And you'll probably find out what I was going to talk about this week, next week. So stay tuned. But anyway, we're talking about reading and the decline in reading. The reason being, and the reason why I found it so interesting was because I had come across an article on X. Yes, I use social media very bad. Boo-hoo. But but it in that post it was talking about an article, an essay actually, from an author named Rose Horowitz. I will correct it if I'm wrong during the editing of this video, but she mentioned something very alarming. And people can be sensationalists, but it is interesting because I looked at my own life as a avid reader, a self-professed avid reader, and an aspiring author. I've written a couple of manuscripts myself. I noticed it in my own life that I tried to read and I can barely get 20 pages in a day. It's something that I genuinely have to be very intentional about. And why does that matter? It's not important. I can just scroll through my social media, you might be thinking, or, I just prefer audiobooks, which are all well and good. It's something that you should be doing, engage with information. That's why this channel exists. And there are many other great channels on YouTube that give you information. But I'm going to try and convince you as to why, that article, which was entitled, if I haven't said it already, we are entering a post-literate society, meaning that we are entering a society that just can't read at the same level that it used to. But before we get into the fear mongering and scaring you into opening Dickens or Hemingway or whoever, reader from age old that you want to include, I do want to preface this by saying that reading in general society is a surprisingly new thing. First of all, writing itself is a relatively new thing in human history, or should I say, it's something that isn't as old as you might think it is. And the first sort of written text was present. The first alphabet, the first systems of writing were first discovered in ancient Sumeria, which is modern day Iraq, about 5,000 years ago. And it was generally, for most of this 5,000 year period from then to here, simply a mode or means of communication that many people in society just didn't have access to. Reading was an elitist thing, like playing golf or, whatever you go going to ski in the Alps, something that many wealthy people only had access to. So reading as we understand it today as an activity or skill that people can do, something that's common amongst the general populace around the world, isn't as new as you might think it is. For most of the 5,000 years that we've had writing, the first texts or things that resemble texts were discovered in ancient Sumeria and are about 5,300 years old. I stand to be corrected. I know my editor is going to correct me at some point, but reading as we understand it, is something that wasn't available to many of the masses. Most people throughout human history, in the history of writing and reading, could not read and could not write. And it wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that it became something that was widespread. But again, why is it important then if it's something that most human beings were relatively okay with going without, or well, they weren't okay with it. It was, they were functioning as human beings. But the point is that reading becoming something that's accessible to the masses has been a huge benefit to our society. I'll tell you why that reading is important. It's something that engages, the more you read, the more your brain is engaged, and it develops the way that you interact not only with text obviously, but with other things, visually, and it helps you engage your brain in ways that you otherwise would not be able to had you not been able to read, right? And this is reflected in our society in general. Our generation, of human beings in general, not like Gen Z, millennials, that kind of thing, is a lot more intelligent. The floor, should I say, of IQ is a lot higher than it once was, say, 100 years ago, because we have been encouraged to read in schools and all of that thing. But researchers, scientists, the like, have seen a decline in reading. In fact, even at university level, where we usually associate reading as an inherent part of getting a degree, an inherent part of learning at a university level. You are expected to engage with texts on a regular basis. But what many professors, and this is anecdotal, are seeing is that they have to scale back on a lot of the reading material because kids simply can't keep up with it. We also see that goes way back, and you see it at the foundational phase level. And I have a few statistics that are a bit worrying. Here comes the fear mongering. But 70% of American kids at a grade 4 level cannot read proficiently. So it's not that they can't read at all, but they can't read to derive meaning from what they're reading. So, which is problematic, and it leads to the issues that we find later on, that American adults, I'm using the US because these studies have been conducted extensively there. That's where most of the data has been done before you call me Eurocentric or Western centric. They say that about 15 to about 20% or 20 to 30%, again I'll correct it, of adults in America are functionally illiterate. It doesn't mean that they can't read. Again, functional illiteracy means that you can't read at a level beyond the words that you are seeing, meaning you can't read to functionally derive meaning from a text, understanding of a text, and what is being conveyed to you at the level, or at an accurate level, so to speak. And this is something that's prevalent across the world. I mean, here in South Africa, where I'm recording this video, only 30% of learners between grade 1 to 3 can read at a sufficiently proficient level, or the level that is expected traditionally of those learners in their grade. And a much more worrying, should I say, statistic is that 15% of those learners here in South Africa are unable to read meaning at all. And these kids go to school, so it's not like they're not going to school. And we see that same trend penetrates and goes further into it follows those kids through to an adult level. So it is important that we address this. And even more worrying, which again, people, or should I say kids in this sense, they pick up things and they pick up cues from adults. So it's important that we also look at the adults as well. Only 2% of American parents were reported as reading to their children. 2%. I mean, reading to your kids was supposedly something that is part and parcel of raising your children, but we see that it's something that only 2%. But that's something I believe, in my personal opinion, is also indicative of, a broader trend of abdicating. I wouldn't call it abdicating, but rather outsourcing, the responsibility, if you will, of raising children, not because people don't want to do it, but simply the demands of modern life forcing people to, prioritize earning a living than, say, reading a bedtime story to a child. But it is important that children should be able to read. And I'll preface it with this. Reading in and of itself is something that engages all the parts of your brain, not just the ones that you think they are. And it's also an activity that, while is unnatural, like I said, it's a very recent thing that human beings are able to read. It is something that does, and is proven through studies to develop your brain. It engages different parts of your brain. So it's like, going to the gym, if you will. I could go into specifics, but in the sense of keeping this short and concise for your short attention spans, I'm just gonna keep it at the surface and say that reading engages different parts of your brain, and it enables you to interact with your different senses in a much better way than you otherwise would have had you not been able to. So I really do encourage you to read. And there are more worrying statistics, and again, I'm prefacing this, I am using American statistics because the inspiration for this video was an article by an author from The Atlantic, and those numbers, those figures will obviously be in an American context. But if you do look around, you'll see that it's a trend that's not just prevalent in the US. Before you say, those stupid Americans, but something that you will even see in your daily life. Just kidding you all, but it's true in a manner of speaking, because we need to remember that all of these social media apps and all of these these distractions, these platforms are designed to grab your attention and activate certain parts of your body and your brain, to keep your attention span short, and they literally pay people millions, if not billions of dollars to work on your and really degrade your ability to concentrate and to engage your brain. So it really is important. You should exercise your brain more often. It's kind of like fast food, but for your mind and your eyes. But anyway, I'm definitely all over the place now, but I really do want to go back to the inspiration for this video, and it was an article again by Rose Horowitz, which is titled "The End of Reading Is Here." It is behind a paywall, but I've tried to summarize the subject matter through other studies and through other avenues, and some of the things that were brought up in that video that are relevant to what I'm saying is that at the advent of the 21st century, to a much more alarming 16% as of 2023. So the 28%, just for context, was measured in and around the last 2 decades. I really do want to emphasize it again, that it's important that we read, because reading helps us understand the world around us. It helps us give meaning to some things that frustrate us, that we don't, concepts that can lead to change, lest we forget that all these ideas that have made people's lives better were concepts that had been written down, that people read, understood, identified with, and followed through. Just to carry on the train of statistics, I have one more that's quite alarming as well, that the article quotes. In 2022, a study was done that asked adults if they had read a book in the past year, and most had not reported doing so, a number that has since declined to just 16% now that a new study was conducted in 2023. It is a very critical time to be reading, because there's so many technological advancements, there's so many developments that are going through. I mean, you can see AI is becoming a thing that you genuinely cannot avoid. We see, as I'd mentioned earlier, social media and how it affects our attention spans. It affects how we understand and how we relate to ideas. It affects how we see nuance, which is, the little threads, and the little contrasts and contradictions that are in ideas, things that, you need to be able to read, to make those distinctions and separations. And once we fail to do this, put differently, once we fail to keep exercising this muscle, we outsource, if you will, we let other people, we become passive in people relating ideas to us. We can't critically analyze ideas, and it's important that you should do, because in the absence of you understanding and reacting accurately or appropriately, better put, to ideas, in the absence of that, you won't be able to change things that need to be changed, prevent things that need to be prevented, because the people that are forcing their ideas and their thoughts, their way of doing life to you are actively engaging with ideas to bring them to you. There's billions of dollars that are invested to making sure that your attention span is held as much as possible, and so on and so on. And it gets to a worrying point in our society where gambling has become more common than reading. So, not to scare you, it was just a video today that really should wake you up that these big tech companies, ironically, I'm saying this on a YouTube video, but these big tech companies are investing billions of dollars into shaping the way that you think and consequently how you live your life. So it really is important that you really engage with ideas, you engage with thought to see that what they are giving to you, what they're trying to force onto you, is something that you either want or you don't want. Like, for example, how data centers can affect your day-to-day life because they're building them, and you need to understand, the process, the arguments that they make in favor of building data centers and how they will shape your everyday life, because data centers use water, they use electricity, they make noise, and all of these things that you need to be aware of. AI will affect your job in one way or another. So it is important that you understand how it works, and how it will affect your job. So things like that require you to engage with ideas, engage with information. And if you can't read, or if you've forgotten how to read at an acceptable level, you won't be able to push back. Like I was saying earlier, that the greatest, revolutions, the greatest changes in society, recent society, were possible because somebody read and saw that their status quo is just not it, and they communicated this idea in text, in arguments that people were able to resonate with. And in the absence of this, in the absence of people being literate, you lose that element of critically analyzing ideas. So I really do hope this encourages you to read, encourages you to open your eyes. And again, I really do also want to preface this argument, again, lots of prefacing here, but it doesn't mean that all technology is bad. Funny enough, if we go back in history, writing, Socrates actually had said that writing was going to make people stupid, because he argued that people not being able to speak and engage with ideas orally would make people dumb. And so this is a tale as old as time, that yes, fear mongering does happen. There was fear mongering even with reading itself, specifically the reading of novels. In this 18th and 19th century, there was a big debate among scholars that novels were going to make people dumber and reading them. There was even an argument that because women liked reading fiction more than men did, that women might develop at a slower rate than generally speaking, because novels would somehow make them dumber. So this was a tale as well. There's also another part in Britain, again in the 19th century, where these serials, basically like a series of short stories called twopence, because they cost 2 pence to read, 2 pence stories, had proliferated amongst the working class that was just starting to read. And they said that these things would make working class people dumb because they're just reading for excitement. So all of these ideas, they were people overreacting to the advent of new technologies, making things different than what people did know, and oftentimes hyperbole. And to this point, it happens in society. It's just a general human thing. I have an example of that, and it was the Iran war. Funny enough, I have a relative that lives and works in Saudi Arabia, and when I was phoning her, when the airstrikes were at their intense stage, I phoned her, to find out how she was doing and all of that, and she was like, my boy, people tend to overstate things. Nothing is as bad as the media made it seem to. Things were pretty quiet, in other words. So sometimes, the media has a way of exaggerating things in order to get your attention. But again, you see it in your daily life, that you can't concentrate, you can't read, certain texts, even articles, without being distracted. I saw it with, my reading of actual novels, that I have to genuinely be intentional about reading 20 pages a day in a novel. And so I thought it was important that it's something that we should be aware of. Train your brain, make sure that, generally speaking, that your your technology is working for you, not against you, and don't allow and don't abdicate, your responsibility in ensuring that your brain is adequately engaged, not just engaged with any old thing, allowing yourself to be blown by the wind by, billionaires somewhere who, even by their own admission, not explicitly, through their words, but implicitly to what they do to their own kids. They don't let their kids have phones early on. They take them to kids that force these kids to read, and they, shut down from technology, from time to time, which shows that what they peddle to you might not be as good for you as, they lead you to believe in their marketing. So just food for thought for today. This video is it really is all over the place, but again, I hope you learned something, and this is definitely a topic that I want to engage with you in the comments. So comment, man, on whether you've seen it in your own life and what you're going to do differently, how you're going to relate to this advent of new technology. And I should say that there are many other ways to learn. Some people might struggle to be engaged in reading, but when you present things visually to them, they learn better. Some people listen to audiobooks, which is all well and good, but don't make it that this one thing is good for me, so I'll neglect the other. Let everything work together and be omnivorous. I think that's correct. But be, multi-talented in your ability to take in information in different ways. It just makes you a more interesting person, makes you a smarter person, and it makes you, more ambidextrous. That's the word I was looking for. And for real this time, we're done for today. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your support, man. We have, for the first time, reached 50 subscribers. Can you believe it? And it's like, we've gone like 6 months without a video, and we grew in support. But keep telling your friends, keep telling your family members, keep telling the people around you that there's an opportunity for you to learn a little something about everything somewhere there by YouTube. And keep watching, man. There's going to be so many other videos. We're going to be consistent. As you can see, you're seeing this video the following week from the last one. So yeah, let's keep engaging with it, keep growing this thing so that other people can hear something about everything. And until next time, goodbye.